My name's Christina Inge. I am the founder and CEO of ThoughtLight, a digital marketing and experience agency here in Boston. And that's where I'm joining you from here. I put some captions on at the bottom of the screen for folks. It is auto captioning, so I'm sure it's going to have some surprises for us, but I did put some captions at the bottom for everybody to see. And welcome any questions. So we're going to be talking today about empathy mapping. It is the next tool you're going to absolutely love in all of your product development, whether you're a product manager or a product marketer. Let's do a quick show of hands at the beginning. How many people here are product managers or in some way responsible for the engineering or development of a product? Yes, the session is going to be recorded. Okay, who here is a product marketer? Okay, PM, product marketing. Okay, product manager, product marketing manager, UX. Well, I have exciting news for you because empathy mapping cuts across UX, product development, and product marketing. You can use it in different ways in the different contexts, but it works across all of these different disciplines. So what exactly is empathy mapping? Well, first off, just wanted to take a very brief moment. We were asked to share a slide thanking all of our sponsors. So here's everything you need to know about Product Camp as well on that sponsor slide. And that's also something that comes out of empathy mapping. You know, this is a very big conference. It's online in a different format than it's ever been before. So what do you need to know in order to make the most out of your product camp experience? One is a quick link that tells you how to orient and navigate around this particular conference. It's simple little gestures like this that can come out of an empathy mapping exercise, or it can be an entire persona or an entire campaign. So this is a great quote. Empathy is our ability to see the world through other people's eyes, see what they see, feel what they feel, and experience things as they do. And I'll share some resources with the sources for all of this content and all of these quotes. So empathy-driven product research is very different from what you might be used to, which is often market research if you're a marketer, or UX research if you're a product manager or a UX professional. It's closer, though, to UX research. So if you're coming from the marketing world, you need to sort of throw out, not entirely, but partially, everything you know about research in order to shift over to an empathy mapping mindset. Doesn't mean you can't bring in market research later on, but it means that for the purposes of creating empathy maps, forget about market research. Empathy mapping is research that centers on feelings and facts together in balance. So feelings, the feelings aspect of empathy mapping is how the user feels about the product and about using the product, but it's also about understanding the facts about your end user, who they are, and what their financial or practical relationship is to the company, where they stand in relation to you. For instance, a lot of companies don't take into account the financial investment needed to purchase their product. For instance, this is my favorite pen. It's a Poppins pen. Again, I have no relationship with this particular company. I just happen to be addicted to their pens, but they are expensive. So yes, they are the best pen I have ever found, but they're also 5 times the cost of a typical cheap drugstore pen. So not everybody has access to this product, and part of empathy mapping is not just thinking about your user's feelings, but also about the practicalities that might underlie those feelings. So when you think about empathy mapping, it's not just this soft, squishy thing about what's going on internally, even though that's very important. It's also about the practical issues that might be impacting your end users in terms of how they engage with your marketing, engage with your product, or engage with your company. Now, the empathy phase, if you're familiar with design thinking, which I think a lot of folks on this call are, is probably familiar to you as one of the key phases in a design thinking process. It's a major investment of time, and a lot of companies, when they say they're doing design thinking, they try to rush through it. The reality is the empathy phase of design thinking can often be the longest phase, because it's where you do all of your underlying research to understand, again, the facts and the feelings of how people are engaging with your product. So what is an empathy map? I've talked it up. You probably want to know a little bit more about it. So some people call it a 10-minute persona. Now, who here is not using personas in your product marketing or your product development? Can everyone see my slides? I just got a yes. Okay, because I just got a message someone couldn't see my slides. So if you're not using personas, you might be, doing other things to understand your users or your customers, but most of us are using personas. If you struggle to write personas, if you work with your team and you get into arguments about what your persona is really doing, what they're really thinking, an empathy map, there's a reason why they call it the 10-minute persona. It can help you identify the core aspects of the persona and therefore end up on level ground with the rest of your team in understanding what your persona really feels, what they think, what they do, and how they're going to engage with your product. It doesn't mean that the empathy map is the entire persona, but you can use an empathy map as the core basis for a larger, more robust persona development. You can also use an empathy map for user stories. In fact, if you're struggling to narrow down a user story, focus it or prioritize it, if you're a product owner in an agile environment, using an empathy map for quick 10-minute backlog grooming is a really good way of understanding whether you need to split a story, whether the story is robust enough for an entire sprint, and what the value is of the story and whether it needs to be prioritized or not. So it is really a Swiss Army knife type of tool. This is the classical empathy map, and you might be familiar with it. What you do is you put your persona at the center, or the tentative persona, or the user who is at the center of your user story, who should be a persona, but maybe you haven't had a chance to flesh that out yet. And you say 4 things about what's going on with this persona. What does the persona say? What do they think? What do they do? And what do they feel? Now, I'll model that with this pen. What do I say about this pen? I say this is the best pen I've ever used. What do I think? I think to myself, I better not run out of these pens, and the cap is a little bit loose. What do? I write with the pen, and it starts perfectly every time. And what do I feel? I feel that nerdy satisfaction those of us who love pens and notebooks feel when we have the perfect pen. So I say something positive. I think ahead in terms of, do I have enough pens? I use the product for its intended purpose, and I feel nerdy satisfaction, very specific emotion there. So that's the classical empathy map, and you can use this for any particular product. What is your customer or your user saying about using the product? So for instance, if you do accounting software, if your end user is, say, an accounts payable person, they might be sitting down and saying, I need to run payroll. I feel so stressed. Well, maybe not payroll if they're a payroll clerk, or if they're accounts payable, I need to pay all of these invoices, and I'm very confused about what invoices are due when. They're thinking, oh gosh, I hope I don't mess this up. they're feeling stress, and maybe they do a lot of superfluous tasks looking to track down all of those payable invoices. You now know exactly the context in which your user is engaging with your product, or in which they're feeling the need for your product, that you are then going to satisfy by creating the product or service that you're mapping out. Now, notice that in that saying, thinking, feeling, and doing, your accounts payable person is probably going through several different user stories. They're feeling disorganized. They need a simple user interface. They need some way to track all of their invoices. They need something that's simple and intuitive. And that might be 10 user stories. It might be 20 user stories. And now, as you're going through the empathy map, you understand the scope and the magnitude of the problem, and therefore the scope and magnitude of the solution. So a classical empathy map can help you understand your persona on a large scale, but if you get down to the task level, you might be able to also use it to prioritize user stories. So let's go back to our pen example. So let's go into the cap is loose. It's really the only knock on this pen. What do I say? I say, oh my gosh, the cap is loose on this pen, but I'm thinking things that are much more dire. I hope this doesn't leak out inside my laptop bag. I hope this doesn't leave ink all over everything. And this is slightly annoying about the pen. What do? I keep clicking on it, seeing if I can't make it settle more securely on the pen. And what do I feel? Mild annoyance. So if I am the product owner for the pen engineering team, I'm going to think to myself, this is probably a high priority user story. As a user, I need a larger lip holding the pen cap in place so that the cap doesn't pop off and I don't have to worry about ink leakage. Doing a quick empathy map, and you can see here it took me less than 30 seconds, allows you to understand how important a product feature is going to be. Now here though is,
Christina?
Yes?
Christina, I've got a couple questions and a comment in chat, so I'll interrupt you real quickly. So
Sure.
Wendy Storm says, when starting something new and you do not yet know what the persona actually feels, is it good to make a best guess and then tweak as you gain information, or to survey first and then complete the empathy map?
It depends honestly on your resources. Both of those are very valid approaches. I would say if you can do user experience testing or customer discovery interviews, do it so that you truly know what they're feeling. If not, use your best guess, because you can usually make a really good guess. In fact, the empathy map canvas makes it easier to guess when you have less data.
Okay.
I know that we have about 11 minutes left, so I'm going to focus right here on the empathy map canvas. It's a little bit more in depth than a classical empathy map. You've got the thinking and feeling, but those are brought together. What do they think and feel is actually a quadrant of its own. Then you have what do they hear, what do they see, and what do they say and do is also a quadrant of its own. And then underneath, you've got the pain that you're trying to alleviate for the user and the gain that you're trying to create for the user. So the pain that you alleviate with a pen is the inability to write things down. The gain is the ability to write things down, but with maybe a premium pen, the pain is cheap pens are scratchy and run out of ink too quickly, and the gain is a better writing experience. Now, let's break down think, feel, say, do, see, and hear in a little bit more detail in the time that we have left. So what does the user think and feel? How do they feel in the context of the task, or when is the task triggered? When do you pull out your pen and start writing? When do you sit down to your desk as an accounts payable professional and start paying the accounts? Is it once a month? Is it once a day? How are you doing your job? How do you feel when you're performing the task? What's the cognitive load? In other words, does this require a lot of mental effort or a small amount of mental effort? Because that's going to change, for instance, the UI. If it requires a lot of mental effort, you want to have as simple a UI as possible. You always want a simple UI, but if there's a high level of cognitive load involved in a task, in other words, it requires a lot of our mental energy, you want to make sure that everything in your UI minimizes, or your UX minimizes that mental energy. And then when and how do your users' cognitions change throughout the process? Like, do they sit down with anticipation and then that turns to dread when they log in? Do they sit down with dread and then that turns to pleasure when they see how easy it is to do the task? What are their thoughts and feelings throughout the entire process? Now, what are their actions? Regardless of what they're thinking or feeling, what is the user actually doing? I may not enjoy running payroll because working with all of those funky user interfaces stresses me out, but I still run payroll because my employees need to be paid. Now, most non-empathy driven approaches stop here. We maybe look at what does the user think and feel about our product. After all, a lot of UX research looks at that. And then we look at people's actions. And those are the only two things we look at. Their internal cognitions, their thinking and feeling, and then how does that translate or not translate into action? And we stop there. Empathy mapping takes it a step further. First of all, we go into people's perceptions. I like to use perceptions instead of seeing and hearing because it's more inclusive of people who have visual or hearing impairments, is to simply say, with whatever sense they're using, what are they perceiving? It also applies to more use cases because you might not have anything you're hearing when you're running accounts payable software or doing payroll. There's not much that I hear when I listen. We'll use this pen because, again, the cap's loose and it doesn't give you that satisfying click. So what are they perceiving? How does this feel in the hand? How does the user interface look? Is it in a noisy environment? So in other words, using all of their senses, what is the information that's coming into the user in the context in which they are using your product or service? What information are we providing to our user through all of their senses? And also, what sensory inputs might be distracting them, causing them pleasure, causing them distress? And how do we, with our product, work with that sensory environment? And then think about what's easily perceptible for the user versus what's difficult for them to use. I am turning 45 this summer, and I can tell you, in terms of what I see, without these, I am lost. Y'all are a blur. So I need these. So think about, again, what is the average age or environment in which people are using the tool. We recently did a learning interface design for a community college and trade school where most of our students are low income. And one of the challenges that low income students often have is that their phone is the only device to which they have regular access in the home. So even if you're 19 years old, if you're doing your homework on your phone, you need to have that accommodated for with larger fonts. And so looking at that sensory experience is very important. And then finally, you want to look at the influences on the user. And I know that we're close to time, so I want to make sure I leave time for people's questions. What impacts the user's decision to engage with the product, and what influences impact them while engaging with it? If you're on the marketing side, you probably spend a lot of time focusing on what impacts people's decision to engage with your product. What are the influences on the buying process? Who plays a role in the consumer's buying decision? But you also, from a customer satisfaction point of view, want to look at the influences that impact them while engaging with it. So for instance, if I am running payroll and I'm a payroll clerk in a cube farm with 20 other payroll clerks there, and 2 of them have a bad attitude and constantly complain about the user interface, my thoughts and feelings about your user interface are going to become negative. If, on the other hand, I'm a small business owner running payroll alone, I may still not like your user interface, but instead of just getting angry, I might think I'm dumb. I might blame myself. I might feel stressed thinking, gee, I can't learn this. And so what is happening to a person effectively and cognitively in their environment while they use your product? And that's really important to look at as well. And then finally, very quickly, think about how they summarize all of the above. What do they say about their experience, and try to vary that by persona. Who's saying what in what different contexts? Now, how do you gather all of the information for empathy mapping? You can do a field study. You can do a focus group. You can use UX methods such as card sorting, or you can use user interviews. So empathy mapping plugs in very nicely to your existing methodologies. So that's how you get started with empathy mapping. You can use the empathy map canvas. You can use a classical empathy map. I'm going to provide some resources, including a link to where you can download a free empathy map canvas and use it at your leisure and experiment with it, as well as some additional readings on empathy mapping. I know we're close to time. Want to leave some time for your questions. I will be in the Slack channel after the session if you have some questions I don't get to. That's my email address on the screen, Christina@thoughtlight.net. You can also tweet at me at Christina Inge, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions there. Again, thank you for coming out to my talk, and I will hop into the questions right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina. We do have a couple of questions that have been asked during your presentation, and everyone feel free to think of a question now because we do have 10 minutes devoted for that. So let me see. The first question that I have is from Yuting Chu, and that question is, how do you synthesize your learnings or research into a position statement or a value proposition statement?
That is a really great question. I would, again, start with that empathy map and look at, let me actually back into the slide. If you take a look at the empathy map canvas, the nice thing about it is that it dovetails with the value proposition canvas at the bottom. That's what makes it so valuable. So remember that the value proposition canvas talks about pain relievers, and it talks about gain creators, and it talks about your users' jobs to be done. So think about the job to be done as centering here. What do they think and feel, and what do they say and do? And you can use that to synthesize it into the pain that you're relieving and the gain that you're creating, and then summarize that using some wordsmithing into a value proposition. So for instance, we make pens that write correctly every time for people who are serious about their note-taking. That implies the pain, which is that a lot of pens don't start correctly every time. It says the who, people who are serious about their note-taking, and it tells you what the gain is. So if you're using the value proposition canvas, the empathy map canvas works really well with that because it's already got your pains and your gains mapped out, as well as talking about the who, the who this is for in terms of what their cognitions and emotions are.
Okay, well, great. And a follow-up question that Yuting has is, sometimes it's very easy to get into a rabbit hole. When do we stop?
When do you stop? Oh, there are so many different schools of thought about that. There's a UX rule of thumb that, if you have done 3 to 5 interviews, you're not going to get any more information past 3 to 5 interviews. On the other hand, I teach a course on how to develop a product using the business model canvas, and there you're usually supposed to do 100 interviews. In fact, I work with the National Science Foundation Innovation Core site at Brandeis, and they require on the national level that you do 100. So some people say 3, some people say 100. I usually say if it starts to all sound the same and everybody is telling you the exact same thing, you've done enough interviews. If you're still getting more information and you're not seeing any kind of pattern, darn, then you still have to keep doing interviews. So I say the break point is, when do you start to see patterns? And that's when you stop, when you feel confident that you've detected a pattern.
Okay, great. All right, and let's see, we have another question by Jerry Odenwelder. And that is, you mentioned EM was the longest phase. What suggestions do you have if you have time constraints?
Oh, don't we all have time constraints? My suggestions are two. The time constraints usually manifest in two ways. One is managerial pressure, right? Your management wants you to ship as quickly as possible, and the other is just the practical need to, you don't have all day, and it's your team's capacity. So if it's managerial pressure type of time constraint, what you want to do is communicate the fact that focusing on empathy is going to save you time in the long run, because you're not going to have to iterate as much in the future. Okay, so if it's a top-down time constraint, make sure that you communicate that this is actually going to help in the long run. Now, if it's a practical time constraint, in fact, you just do not have sufficient time, then take the amount of time you have all told from the beginning to when you're expected to ship and divide it up accordingly, giving the empathize stage maybe 15% more time than the other stages, just 15% more time. So if you know how much time you have all told, just give 15% extra to empathy and take it out of all of the other phases. And I swear at the end of the day, it's actually going to save you a lot of time.
Okay, great. And Ming Yi has another question, and that looks like all the questions. Then I can tell people how to join Wonder Me. The question is, how do you recruit, interview, or survey participants for your UX study?
Really, really good question. And hi, Ming Yi, it's great to see you too. It really depends on your industry. One of the challenges is that if it's B2C, it's pretty straightforward and easy. There are a lot of tools. In fact, there are ways of recruiting people. You can go to something like a user testing. There's a ton of different platforms that will help you recruit your target audience. I can put those into the resources as well, find my audience and things like that will help you find a B2C audience. Recruiting a B2B audience is a little bit more challenging. Again, there's a ton of platforms out there that for a fee will help you identify your target audience. Now, if you don't have the money to work with any of these recruitment platforms, and I highly recommend them because they do help tremendously in saving time on the recruitment side, and they have a really big applicant pool to select from. Because one of the things you want to be careful of if you don't go to a vendor is that you're going to have either a convenience sample or selection bias. It's going to be friends of friends. They're all going to have something in common in the fact that they're your friends of friends, or they're going to be just a convenience sample, again, going to have too much in common, not necessarily going to be a representative sample. That said, we have, especially in the I-Corps program at Brandeis, some extremely specialized industries where people are trying to recruit users. And there's no way not to use a convenience sample because there's not a whole lot of people out there who buy military disinfecting technology. You need to do what Steve Blank, who pioneered the business model canvas, recommends, which is find a couple of people through your social channels, through LinkedIn, through asking every human being you know, do you know somebody who buys this or that type of, do you know any pen designers, for instance, or whatever it is that you are recruiting that's super specialized, and then ask, this is what Steve Blank recommends, ask the people that you interview to recommend your next interviewee. That's going to accomplish two things. One, makes it easier to find interviewees, and two, it's a warm introduction that's going to make somebody better disposed to talking to you, although it might also make them more disposed to say, too many kind things. However, this actually feeds into a different answer that indirectly is related to your question, Mingy, which is a lot of times when you're doing empathy mapping or any other kind of user research of any format, whether it's UI or customer discovery, especially if these aren't strangers you recruited, but people you recruited through your network, they're going to say way too many nice things to you. And they don't mean to, but they're inadvertently lying to you by saying, oh, this is a great idea. Of course I need an orange pen where the cap's a little bit loose. So grab a book called The Mom Test. It is, I'll put that into my resources as well. It is absolutely brilliant. People misunderstand the mom test and they all think it means explaining something to your mom, in other words, to a lay person. It's not that at all, because your mom could be a developer or an engineer and understand your product perfectly. What the mom test is trying to get the negatives and the downsides about your product that you need to address out of people through indirect questioning, so that even if they love you as much as your mom does and are just trying to save your feelings and say, oh no, it's a lovely pen, really, I don't need the cap after all, it's marvelous, you actually get at the truth. You bypass around people's kindness to find out what the flaws are in your product. And you can do that even with your mom and find out what she really thinks about your product. Or if she's like my mom, she would have told me your hair looks terrible and your makeup's not good. But anyway, it will absolutely help you. And my mom was a real sweetheart, but she didn't sugarcoat it, but it will help you to get around any kind of sugarcoating.
Okay,
yes.
Great. I need to just wrap things up, and I'm going to end on a positive note with some comments from Jean Storley, who is presenting later on the 6-word story. And she said, empathy maps are a great tool for crafting narratives and synthesizing data. If you know that will be an interim deliverable, you can design your user research to solicit the insights you need to resonate empathy map. So she's expressing her appreciation, as am I. Thank you so much, Christina. This was a wonderful presentation. I look forward to watching it again afterwards. And I am going to actually go ahead and put up the screen for the next session. Let me see if I can find it. No, I can't find it just yet. But I do want to share that I put in the chat the way to get over to the Slack channel. The Slack channel is actually channel 14, and it's called Market Research and Methodologies. I would encourage you all also to provide any feedback on this session. You can go to the link that's u10.me/survey. And finally, for networking, you can head over u10.me/wonder, and you put in the password pcamponline. There's basically 2 parts to this Wonder Me. You can see different color spaces. So if you wanted to go chat with someone in this group, you would go to the red room space. And if you would see a little circle with somebody's face and just go toward them, and all of a sudden you can share a space with them, kind of like Zoom, where you have audio and video together with them. And then there's a networking A and B space, which is like randomly bumping into someone in the hall and talking to them about whatever that doesn't have to do with the session. Christina is more of an avid user for Slack. So that's where she said she's going to be. She said she can't be in 2 places at once. So she has chosen to be in the Slack room. So you're welcome to see her there. And I appreciate all of your attention and your questions. And I need to get started with the folks coming in for the next session, which is on mentoring, and it's a panel. So I welcome you to stay if you'd like. So thanks again, Christina, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you everyone for being here, and hope to see some of you over in channel 14 if you have any more questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.